Here are some other business headlines from across the globe. Elon Musk has announced that he'll be launching his tunneling and transportation startup in China. The Boring company was founded by the Tesla CEO as a solution to congestion by building underground tunnels where passengers will be moved in autonomous vehicles at high speeds. The Boring company recently secured its first contract for 2 tunnels in Las Vegas at a cost of $48.7 million. Klarna, the Swedish payments company with a shop now, pay later model, has become the largest private fintech firm in Europe. A fresh round of investor funding increased its value to $5.5 billion. Since its launch in 2005, Klarna has gained popularity among cash-strapped millennials who want to shop before payday. The company processes 1 million transactions per day and has over 60 million users worldwide. America's 2 largest newspaper chains have merged in a $1.4 billion deal in an effort to combat declining circulation and plunging advertising revenue. Gannett's purchase of Gatehouse Media will create a conglomerate that will own more than 250 daily newspapers, including USA Today. The new company will retain the Gannett name and will have publications from 47 states, reaching more than 145 million unique visitors each month. The African Development Bank has approved a loan of $97 million to improve access to water in remote regions of Senegal. The project is expected to have a direct impact on 300,000 people and will boost rural incomes by creating 28,000 jobs. Now over to our first topic. Soaring levels of unemployment in South Africa have laid bare the country's problems with economic and social issues. The number of unemployed people has jumped to its highest since the global financial crisis more than a decade ago, piling pressure on President Cyril Ramaphosa's pledge to deliver a turnaround. According to official figures, South Africa has an unemployment rate of 29% and well over half of its youth are out of work.
I'm the only sole breadwinner at the age of 30. Or else it's traumatic. I'm looking after 2 21-year-olds and a 1-year-old. And, well, the house chores and without an income, it's not easy. Like I say, certain things, they get emotionally exhausting.
Joining me to discuss this are African analysts Tamzanga Joe and Lagun Akinloye. Are you surprised that South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world? I think they're just below the occupied Palestinian territories. It's shocking, isn't it?
South Africa has got 3 problems. One, it's an education problem and skills development, where a lot of people in the rural areas, other people don't even get an opportunity to go to the schools they want to go to. So there's that disparity, and they're trying to do a lot of funding, but that will take time. And then the second problem you have is there are a lot of South Africans who want those jobs, but they're in different areas because they've got quotas because of devolution and the province where you are. But you also have a lot of foreigners who come in for the high-end jobs. So you're talking about doctors and engineers. It will take a long time for South Africa to develop those. So those figures don't speak to exactly what's happening on the ground.
I think that some of the issues you've just raised, I think any country across the world, especially in Africa, Lagun, would raise them, that, you know, people need to update their skills to match exactly what the labour market is looking for. Is that really an excuse?
I wouldn't see it as an excuse personally. I think if you look at the issue with Africa, and people had real hope with the Cyril Ramaphosa becoming the president of the country. He's a mining magnate and a businessman and was trumpeting up his economic skills. And the truth of the matter is that in the past year, almost 500,000 people have been thrown onto the unemployment market. If you look at the major companies, for example, a Nedbank, the largest commercial and retail provider in the country, has said that business is like far from booming, that the economic outlook is at 0.7%. The country itself is in a very precarious situation, and and unemployment comes from the lack of planning in a way. It seems that the Ramaphosa has been so bogged down by internal party issues and fighting the remnants of the Jacob Zuma faction of his party that he has, in a way, forgotten about the structural adjustment that needs to be done in various sectors of the country.
No, yeah, but Juliana, if I can come in, we shouldn't forget that Ramaphosa has not been there for a very long time. We're only talking about a year and a bit. And even if you were talking about planning...
Well, he's been in politics for a while.
He's been in politics for a while, but he went off to business in 1994, 95. He went off to business.
To Lagan's point then, that, you know, these are some of the skills that you would have thought, and he did pledge that he would bring in some sort of economic revival and thriving market, which he hasn't done.
But those things don't happen overnight.
They're also saying that discouraged workers are increasing as well. So these are the people that just feel there is no hope. They're not even looking for work because they just don't think it exists. That's a huge issue, isn't it, Lagan?
It is a huge issue. When there's apathy in the land and people have given up on actually finding jobs, you know to yourself there is a problem at the end of the day. I think one of the main issues is that people have become so obsessed with the political situation. If you look around President Ramaphosa, there are allegations of corruption and the funding of his campaign. And once again, you look at him still fighting these Zuma remnants, and you know, you have to think very clearly about the people who you just mentioned, those in desperate need of jobs and those who have given up. And sadly, we get bogged down in politics by, on one side, the economic needs of your people, the other side, cementing your own stability.
South Africa is very unionized in terms of the workers putting their demands. So, you know, that's why a lot of miners or investors in miners are beginning to look at Zimbabwe rather than South Africa, because in South Africa, the threshold for people to go on strike is very low.
Yes.
And so miners, I mean investors in mining in particular, don't want to deal with that risk of knowing that their mine could close when the prices are up. And sometimes when the miners come back, you have given them maybe another 10% or 3%, and then the demand globally is not there. So this is an ecosystem. It goes beyond the borders of South Africa.
As a man, let me just, before I come to you, Lagan, as a man from Southern Africa, do you think it's fair to say that, you know, some of the remnants, the legacies of apartheid are still haunting, you know, the lower classes and people of colour?
It is a fair point. It's quite ironic that most people, when they make these analyses, I have no idea whether this is correct or not, but they are saying the Indian South Africans seem to be the beneficiaries of this system, because under apartheid they were kind of a second layer. And so you would get
they wasn't discriminated to as much as
no, they were
blacks.
discriminated against, but they would be given opportunities ahead of black South Africans. And then what happened is that when apartheid ended, they now overtook the white people, and so they kind of benefited the most. But what tends to happen is a lot of white people were owning businesses, farms, mines, whatever you have. So South Africa has to balance between continuity and provision of services and businesses, which is important for government, and investment as well, and making sure that they've provided jobs. So they've tried black empowerment, which has, in most people's eyes, benefited just a small elite within...
Something clearly has to change, right?
Something has to change. Things are changing, but it does take time. There are a lot of young South Africans who are now educated, who are now going into position of power. When you look at their governments, when you look at even the ANC, the Economic Freedom Fighters, or even the DA, most of the politicians that you have in Parliament are very young people, and young people who are looking forward to a different...
And it's the young people that don't have time. They want jobs yesterday. Lagan, let me ask you before we wrap up, do you think this changes the outlook of South Africa on the global political scene?
I think from my point of view, South Africa will always be respected purely for the minerals that they have and the natural resources.
Only for that?
And the struggle that they went through, and to emerge out of it. It holds a very interesting and sovereign place in the system of our minds and in the global political system. And therefore, that's why there will be key interest in it. Put aside the fact that it is a booming economy, irrespective in Africa of what they produce and who they are. So will people's opinion change? My only hope is that they do not get caught up in the America-China trade wars, because obviously we are aware the main exports tend to be of the mineral variety. And if they are too entrenched into the world system, it will have adverse effects on the local economy itself and unemployment, as already mentioned.
Now, for over a year, the Democratic Republic of Congo has been fighting a severe Ebola outbreak that has killed 1,700 people. This is the 10th outbreak the country is facing since 1976. The killer disease is spreading across communities already beset by the severe hardships of extreme poverty and insecurity. The World Bank recently announced that it's mobilizing up to $300 million to scale up support for the global response. But donors have been slow to surface. Operations over the past 12 months have already cost $114 million, and much more will be needed to stem the increase of cases.
So far, only a small fraction of what was spent on West Africa has been available for the DRC, and there's absolutely a requirement now for substantially more money, running into several $100 million during the course of the remainder of this year, to be available to bring the outbreak under control. And what I say to those who are considering financing the response is it will be much cheaper and more effective to have a scaled up response now than to have a lukewarm approach which isn't properly financed, because if we do that, we'll find we're dealing with this problem for much, much longer, and it'll cost a lot more money and it'll take a lot more lives.
The 2014 outbreak cost over $50 billion. $50 billion. I was shocked. I had to check and recheck, but it's true, it cost that much. Do you think the world just don't want to pay for an African crisis?
I think it's very difficult when you have the numbers that we're talking about here and the outbreaks in general. In comparison to 2014, it is obviously on a smaller scale, but has the potential. 1,700
people have died.
Very, very true. But like the figures that we had last time were in like the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
It was a very deadly one at the end of the day. I think the issue at hand here is that they are trying. The WHO and the funders and everyone is on board.
US are the biggest donators, by the way.
But they've encountered numerous problems when trying to deal with it. When going into local communities, there are suspicions from individuals and, like, tribal chiefs and people there that, why are they coming here? Have they come to give us Ebola? And there's a general misunderstanding of how to contain people, the burial of individuals, and this has caused problems to fight it. Not only that, the region itself is very well known to have armed militia groups who roam the region. They've gone as far as to kill health workers and to scare people away, and it makes it incredibly difficult to actually deal with it and contain it. I think that's probably the biggest issue at hand, the understanding of what to do when a case comes up of Ebola.
That's quite an interesting analysis by Lagan there, Tam, but some people would say that Ebola's just not pretty. If there's a severe flood or if there's been a huge earthquake, you can see on some British channels, a public outcry. They'll say, please donate money. I haven't seen that for Ebola just yet.
It would seem that there are quite a number of things going on. The first is that there is lack of information in the public domain, in the West in particular, in terms of the scale. Even Lagun was saying that this is on a smaller scale than what happened in 2014 in West Africa. It's not true. This is bigger. This is a country that is as big as probably most
mainland Europe.
Mainland Europe, Western Europe. And what you then have is this is spread from one end of the country to another, and they are failing to contain it within specific cities and towns. They're talking about Goma now in Rwanda, threatening to close that border. But what has since happened is that, as is the case with the Democratic Republic of Congo, over the years, a lot of these things, there is the tolerance level has just gone up because it's a country that has had war. You've had millions of people dying. So sometimes when 1,000 people die, it's seen as a big number. It's not making as much of news as it should, which is a pity for the media in particular. And there are lessons that were learned in West Africa in 2014. Those lessons should have been transferred to deal with this crisis. We don't seem to see that. All those vaccines that people were talking about, we don't seem to be seeing that. What the government is doing, it's a new government, of course, with Tshisekedi and others, but people like Kabila are still there. So all those lessons should have been learned and should have been put in place. And of course, when there's a crisis like this, you are dealing with the traditional people who think they have a way of dealing with it, religious people who think that prayer care will be the solution, and the medical people trying to come in, trying to advise people. It's so difficult. Even during the election, remember, there were other people who refused to observe those quarantine restrictions that were there.
That's true, but we can't totally blame the locals, because of course, Margaret Chan, when she was the head of the World Health Organization, she said, we, the World Health Organization, are mostly to blame for the things that went wrong. But there have been accusations, and we've seen this before from United Nations organizations and others, that sometimes, the finances can be misused. Of course, what's the point of going to some rural areas and spending millions on literature and pamphlets and five-star hotels and not spending it on the vaccinations?
Lessons have been learnt, I think, personally. I think that the response time and the general medical setup of the containment centres and the investment by the US aid and by the American company Merck, who provide the vaccines, and they are doing in comparison to what happened in West Africa, lessons have been learnt, and they are approaching it better. But there are many bottlenecks, as we've discussed, from a local perspective, as you just said, from a government perspective. The tracking the funding has become extremely difficult because of the new government. The ministry have said to have been creaming the top of it, and and distributing it not the way that it should be done. So that creates a problem from the highest level. Then we have the local level at the end of the day, which in a way is transient with the system on top, which makes it incredibly difficult to not only contain it, but to track the effects of it, to track down people who have supposedly been contaminated. The border is very porous at the end of the day. You've mentioned that Rwanda have attempted to close the border. That lasted for only a day because out of international pressure they had to reopen it, purely because people travel so continuously through the border that you have to ensure that the situation is not only contained but understood.
Okay, what you're saying is perfectly correct, but now the World Health Organization have said it's a global emergency. Tam, you've worked with a lot of African governments. Why can't the African Union nip this in the bud? I know it's more complicated than that, but should we be relying on the World Health Organization and funds from the US in a Donald Trump economy and a political style that is America first? Why can't we as Africans resolve this issue? It is
the structure of things. The AU will tell you that the WHO, these are member countries of the agency.
Well, they're paying 0.01% towards funding.
Yeah, but they will also say that they expect that the WHO has expertise, both a local office as well as
But what expertise? The expertise that get it wrong? Not the local expertise that the African governments will have, the DRC will have, locals who are able to speak to loved ones or neighbours and tell them this is what needs to be done.
In fact, I do agree with you, because what it means is that the AU in particular in this case should have been taking a bigger role. Why? Because we want to be able to see solutions that are local. These are the people who will understand the cultural issues, the security issues, and the weaknesses within
where to spend the money.
Where that money should actually go. So where the priorities are and where these people are and how they behave. Because if you don't have homegrown solutions to these things, remember, this virus is not a new virus. These countries have had to deal with this virus over a very long time. So sometimes there's an expectation that, USAID or somebody will come from Geneva and they will have a solution. No, the people who are local, who have dealt with some of these things for a very long time and have solutions, but sometimes they will see you driving in a 4x4 going through and they just look at you and not... That's why some of these things don't actually have the impact that... so the AU must be taking a bigger role.
$50 billion, Lagan, for the 2014 outbreak. That seems almost too much. Can you break it down for me? I know you're not an economist, but please, $50 billion.
I mean, the amount itself, it was a tragedy and a spread that has never been seen before in like the modern era.
Yeah.
In terms of the pace in which it went from town to town, village to village, and
country to country, continent to continent.
It took us unawares. Therefore, that amount of money, though quite a lot, led to it being quelled.
When you go to the DRC or any other country that might be in crisis, the AU should have been mobilizing the companies that are investing in those countries because they have an interest to make sure that this thing is sorted.
The AU and Nigeria, South Africa, neighbouring countries need to know how to bound together rather than go cap in hand and wait for a saviour to come.
Gosh, I think that's a nice way to wrap the discussion. Lagam Akinloye, Tamsankujo, thank you so much for joining me today. Sadly, that's all we have time for, but do join us again at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.